So you understand the importance of progressive overload, but you find yourself stranded in regards to how do I program for progressive overload? But before I give you guys some ideas, let me just to really make sure, I'm gonna have Coach Brian Miner, really break down this concept for you guys, because a lot of people who think they understand what progressive overload is, to put it bluntly, they don't.
The idea of needing to beat the logbook, every session. I mean, that's something that was, drilled into me early on in my training career as well. And I sort of had to unlearn and understand, what creating a stimulus for hypertrophy actually required, So ultimately, I mean, this is a topic I've discussed quite a bit, but being able to add weight to the bar, being able to accommodate this additional performance is more so a result of positive adaptations that have occurred. And you're by getting better and doing more, ultimately what you're doing is like keeping pace with your rate of adaptations, if that makes sense. So if you can think of it as like a threshold that you need to cross in order for positive muscle growth to occur, that threshold is going to be inching up across your training career, but as it's inching up, you're also capable of doing more. So it's something that you're not necessarily chasing, but you're just kind of keeping pace with your capabilities. And as long as your capabilities are trending up, that overload or a overloading stimulus is occurring. So I mean, whether or not you create like a positive stimulus in the training session isn't predicated by what you did in the last session. It's predicated by the degree of adaptations up to that point and where you're at in terms of like your training, trainability, like your capacity for performance.
If that was for you, link is in the description. That was a fantastic interview by Kenny. More where that came from. So peep that. That really got you thinking differently. Before I give you guys 3 progression schemes, I'm gonna have one for beginners, one for intermediates, and then one for advanced guys. Let's go over 2 main things you need to keep into consideration when eventually, and you should be, because it's not that complicated, designing your own progression schemes. So firstly, you need to understand your adaptive capabilities. This is going to be highly correlated with your training age. And eventually, no one should know this like better than you. Eventually. Very clear example here, I've been training for 23 years. So there's a good chance, there's a very, very good chance that, say, you can progress faster than that I will not be able to double the weight that I am curling the way, say, man, a flat out noob who got their first gym membership 23 days ago will be. You can pretty much expect that to be the case. But over time, no one should know this better than you. What is, like, okay, now I'm expecting too much, or you know what, like I'm getting kind of stagnant here. Something's wrong. I need to go in there and figure the situation out. Like you need to develop a keen sense for what you can expect in regards to objective measures, like what goes on in the logbook, basically. Next, you need to understand your tools. Tools being the equipment you have access to, the exercises you perform, their strengths and their weaknesses. We can really break this down into the smaller details, but most often what you're going to have to take into consideration is what movements are more load progression friendly and which movements are more rep progression friendly. This is very easy to see when we compare like 2 things that are on the opposite ends of the gradient. So let's take a Romanian deadlift and a dumbbell lateral raise, right? Romanian deadlift, you probably don't want to be performing super high reps with, because of the technique breakdown will probably render it kind of unsafe at a certain point, right? Same thing with the dumbbell lateral raise, right? You probably don't want to be performing that in the 4 to 6 rep range, where that could be a totally sensible approach when it comes to the Romanian deadlift, especially if the athlete is quite competent when it comes to that movement, right? You do that with the dumbbell lateral raise. That's asking for a lot from a relatively small joint. In both cases, right, like if you were to swap the rep ranges that they both thrive best under, you're kind of misusing your tools. Aside from this, if you understand these two things, the rate of adaptation that you can expect, the rate of progress, and you understand your tools quite well, especially when it comes to that dynamic, which things are best for adding load, which things are best for adding reps, it really becomes an art as much as a science, which is highly appropriate because at the end, that's kind of sort of what bodybuilding is. This first one is for beginners because although you guys have the greatest adaptive abilities, it's a skill. It's a skill to really hold a muscle to the fire when things start to get really hard. And this is especially the case when it comes to isolation movements, because with isolation movements, it's really easy to butt in, improvise using other muscles and take away from what you are trying to do with that specific isolation exercise. I actually got this one from Coach Miner. This should just be his video if we're being perfectly honest. So thank you, Brian, for all the help today. This progression scheme, super simple. Start with a load that you can perform for 8 reps across multiple sets. Anywhere between 2 to 3 sets is pretty good. You will then stick to this load until you can get it all the way up to 17 reps. So guess what? Yeah, that 20-pound dumbbell you're curling, you guys are going to be partners for a while. Usually, since you know this is the case, it's a long way from 8 to 17 reps. What ends up happening, especially with newer lifters, is that they start to find other proxies outside of just like the bottom line. Am I adding reps in this case, right? They start to work on other things, such as like technique, execution. And sometimes what ends up happening with these guys is because they know that they can feel it. They're gonna progress through these isolations quite rapidly. The movements start to change and decay a lot over time. But knowing that, you know what, this is just what I'm gonna be munching on for an extended period of time has a way of giving them a lot of practice with this load, with this movement. And if anything, what you tend to see is just better execution, despite the fact that we are adding many reps over the course of the next few weeks. Next one, this one's for intermediates, one of my favorites, because as an intermediate, I used to do this quite a bit. The training partners and I, what we would do is find a weight that over the course of 4 sets, we could perform 50 reps with, or attempt to perform 50 reps with. If you did that, you would then come the next week at the smallest possible load increment and try to do that with the new load and keep munching on it until you can get at least 50 reps over the course of 4 sets. However, we've amended the thing. These days, instead of 50 reps over 4 sets, I much rather have athletes attempt to do this with 25 reps over the course of 3 sets. Mostly for safety reasons, but also because from a technical aspect, you get more accurate reps and a shorter window of focus. I really want people to focus on what it is that they're doing. And 50 reps, that's a lot of reps, especially with a compound type of movement. It's a fun progression scheme built into a fun game, but most importantly, what we're doing here is we're teaching intermediates how to pace themselves for the sake of having the best total output. This is something you will have to be more aware of when you go from beginner to intermediate. Beginner can totally just blow the lid on the first set and they're fine. Sometimes they even do better on the second set. But as an intermediate, you're gonna have to get a little bit better at pacing yourself in order to generate the best work over the sets that you have lined up for yourself. In this case, 3 sets. And if you want, you can do the 50 rep challenge, but I would save that one for the isolation movements. And 50 reps, 4 sets, go, and then 25 reps, 3 sets, go for the compounds. For my advanced guys, this one's simple. My heart goes out to you guys because you guys are like me. We're kind of screwed. Things are just really slow, but really fun, right? Because you already got your nice little mountain of gains behind you. So what I like to do with advanced guys is, look, whatever progression scheme you are using to advance load, so usually on a compound, on a multiple joint exercise, don't add load after you have reached that quota, the reps through however many sets with whatever load. Don't go up after the first time. Do it 3 times. And I like 3 times for a number of reasons. Oh, and they don't have to be consecutive. They don't have to be consecutive. You know, it can be scattered across this specific training block. I like doing this because it gives you guys a chance to go back and work on some technical kinks that might have taken place. And as a matter of fact, what ends up happening with your redos is the stimulus, because you sort some things out, some little glitches that, you know what, you probably, because you're advanced, you can't see on video, but you know they're there. You sort those things out, and actually the redos end up being better stimulus than the first time. You will also feel a lot more confident once you do graduate, once you do get that promotion and you add load to whatever this exercise might be. You're going to be mentally and physically much more prepared. And that's really important, because a lot of you guys at this point, you guys are hoisting some pretty big loads, and it's nice to go into the next increment feeling over prepared, if anything. You don't have to use any of these, but if you find these useful, there you go. 3 simple solutions, ways to infuse your quest for that progressive overload. If you're not going to use any of these, but if anything, it's got you thinking like, okay, I'm on the right track here. Excellent. For those of you who are like, oh shoot, like, then in that case, just remember this stuff's easy. You know, just remember the first 2 things we started with. Have a good grasp, and this is something that's going to come to you eventually, and no one should know this again better than you. Have a firm grasp on what rate of progression you should be expecting, your tools, understand your tools and how to appropriately use them. And from there, honestly, just have fun with it. Like, turn it into some sort of game. Adults, like children, we perform best when it feels like we are playing. We usually call it flow or something like that, but it's the exact same thing. So just let it flow, have fun with it. And a progression scheme should be, yeah, there should be some logical sense that drives it at its core, but it should also be fun. So play, guys, play. It's good for you.